I Want to Believe. Section. Volver. After his arrival in Europe, Posadas initiated a new tradition for the movement, a fall gathering commemorating the raid on Shangri-La. When the asado, mate, and soccer match ended, the comrades would gather around a fire to hear Posadas' telling of the raid, between performances of the a cappella tangos he sang each night in jail. Sometimes the story and the lyrics changed to draw parallels to recent events, but one song needed no alteration to be revolutionary. Carlos Gardel's Volver. Beginning of song. I prophesize the flickering of the far-off lights will mark my return, the same that lit with their pale reflections hours sunk in pain. And even though I didn't want to return, you always come back to your first love. The tranquil street where the echo said, your life is hers, your love is hers, under the mocking gaze of the stars, that indifferent today watch me return. End of song. After years of running from his home, love, and class, the song's protagonist is forced to return to his station in life by forces as irresistible as the motion of celestial bodies. The term revolution owes its origins to this cosmic sense of fate, coined by 16th century English revolutionaries who claimed their rule was a restoration of legitimate authority as natural as the appearance of the sun on the horizon after a long night. The concept was transformed from there by the American and French revolutions, based not on revolving through repetitive cycles, but on instituting an entirely new secular order, rooted in human rationality and liberty. While Hegel saw these events as indicating that humanity had unchained itself from the endless regression, Marx identified a new, quote, bad infinity taking shape in the bourgeois order, whose political structures could only defend capital's need for endless expansion as it caused regular and ever-worsening crises. He envisioned a revolution that would permanently overcome capitalism, abolishing class society on a violent march toward an entirely new world just beyond the dark horizon. Nonetheless, concepts of irresistible cycles remained central to the imaginations of the 70s revolutionaries. As the manic joviality of one decade deflated into the next, many believed the uncompleted revolution of '68 was something like that which occurred in Russia in 1905, the beginning of a new cycle that would culminate in a 1917-style revolution around 1980. The revolutionary wave that had begun at the end of the First World War would return. All previous failed revolutions would be redeemed. The Soviet Union would, quote, regenerate, and the Fourth International would finally fulfill its prophesied purpose. Nowhere, however, was the concept of restorative revolution more important to the political imaginary than Argentina. Since Perón's overthrow and exile in 1955, the left, right, youth, and workers were united in the messianic demand of Perón vuelve. Riots and armed struggle against the anti-Peronist and anti-worker regimes led to new elections in 1973, which Héctor Cámpora, Perón's left-wing emissary, won easily. Chilean and Cuban presidents Salvador Allende and Osvaldo Dorticos attended his inauguration, immediately followed by a restoration of relations with the socialist world and a grant of amnesty to political prisoners and anti-dictatorship guerrillas. Radical as he may have been, all other political ambitions were sacrificed to the main purpose of his election, clearing the runway for a volver, humming Perón's return. At the moment of his arrival, all the false unity of his movement ended in a carefully orchestrated massacre. Its maestro was López Rega, Perón's chief of security, spiritual advisor to his new wife Isabel, and practitioner of Argentine Espiritismo, a religious syncretism similar to Santeria or Voodoo. He believed Argentinians were unique in Latin America for maintaining a European ethnic purity, while being, quote, enriched by Indian blood, giving them the racial superiority of whiteness rooted in the native soil. To him, Peronism was approaching an occult theology of the Argentine race, dedicated to overcoming the chaos of modernity through the creation of a nationalist religion. Quote, "Our only mission is to bring Perón to Argentina," he said. "His return will be our spiritual triumph." But Rega also understood that the Peronist base skewed left. Its most powerful elements were the CGT, the Peronist Youth, JP, and the new quasi-socialist president, Cámpora. To them, Peronism meant anti-imperialism, anti-elitism, and a fair distribution of the nation's wealth. For Rega, this was all a, quote, political phase to be temporarily encouraged in order to, quote, defeat the forces that are leaving him prostrate in exile. Once that had been achieved, he would use the movement's far right, based in the church, police, and military, to destroy the left. He found allies for the task in a secret Masonic order known as the Propagandou Du. Based in Rome, the lodge was the well-connected hub of an underground network of European fascists and industrialists, whose continued wealth was dependent on crushing socialism the way Mussolini or Hitler had before the war. Fascism had become vastly unpopular or illegal since then, but no less attractive to the elite as a backup plan should the left be re-elected to power. Without much effort, Rega was initiated and indoctrinated to the lodge and its worldview that a, quote, syncretic conspiracy between communists, international bankers, and Zionists controlled the world, preventing unity and sovereignty in nations like Argentina. Numerous false flag terror attacks, assassinations, dirty wars, and military coups around the world in the 60s and 70s could be traced back to their network, including the events in Argentina leading up to the political, quote, national reorganization process. The June 1973 welcoming party for Perón at Ezeiza Airport was the perfect moment to begin the violent sorcery of destroying the left. The first to march in were the organized left wing of the movement, the Revolutionary Tendency, intent on occupying front row center. They were lightly armed, but few researchers of the event believed they initiated any physical conflict before the right Peronist armed forces, Rega installed as snipers, opened fire. Unknown dozens were killed. The ceremony devolved into chaos, and Perón left the airport, convinced the left had caused the bloodshed. Cámpora promptly resigned to allow Perón to run for president. He won in September, just 2 weeks after a military junta in Chile installed Augusto Pinochet to power. Addressing the Argentine revolutionaries, he said, quote, "If you want to be like Allende in Chile, watch how it goes for Allende in Chile. You must proceed calmly." End quote. After focusing all their energy on his return, the left was suddenly divided as to what to do next. With the Poserists marginal and practically forgotten, the major communist group was the Workers' Revolutionary Party, PRT, of Nahuel Moreno, who had argued since the 1955 coup for collaboration with the left elements of Peronism. After the Cordobazo, his collaborator Mario Roberto Santucho created the Guerrilla People's Revolutionary Army, ERP, to attack the military and foreign corporations throughout 1973. Judging the Ezeiza massacre as the initiation of a fascist coup, the ERP not only refused Perón's demands to lay down their weapons, but also hoped to bring him to the bargaining table by killing right-wing figures in his movement one by one. They assassinated their first target, far-right CGT leader José Ignacio Rucci, in the days before Perón's inauguration. It backfired. Perón loved Rucci as a son, and worried that threats to take out Rega next meant Isabel was also on their list. Once in office, he threw a banquet for hundreds of servicemen and announced a new paramilitary organization to defend his wife and the Republic, the Argentine Anti-Communist Alliance, AAA, with López Rega in charge. To whatever extent Perón personally hated the left, or believed in the synarchist conspiracy theory, it is unlikely he shared the same fascistic fervor of Rega's acolytes in the AAA, most of them viciously anti-Semitic and homophobic Hitler obsessives, dreaming of political and ethnic cleansing. He endorsed their blacklist of, quote, enemies of the people to be, quote, executed when found, nonetheless. It was effectively a who's who of the Argentinian left, including Silvio Frondizi, Nahuel Moreno, Agustin Tosco, and Homero Cristalli. In January, ERP guerrillas continued their campaign with an attack on the Azul military garrison that killed 2 colonels in a failed kidnapping attempt. In response, Perón sent a letter to the military vowing to get even tougher on the armed left. Quote, "The remaining number of psychopaths will be exterminated one by one for the good of the Republic," he vowed. 2 days after the attack, he and Rega met with leftist representatives of the Peronist youth, who asked him to reconsider changes to the penal code that would pave the way for harsh repression of political dissidents. Quote, "No one is obligated to stay in a political fraction," Perón replied. Quote, "Anyone who is not happy leaves. Anyone who is in another tendency different from Peronism. What they should do is leave." End quote. One of the JP representatives urged Perón to moderate his rhetoric. The ERP were holdovers from the dictatorship, they said, a, quote, "violence from below generated by the violence from above." Perón disagreed. Quote, "This movement is directed from France, precisely from Paris, and the person who governs it is called Poseres, a pseudonym. The real name is Italian. I have known this naranjo, literally orange tree, slang for someone washed up. I know what they are after, and what they are looking for. So, in that sense, they will not cheat me." End quote. The meaning of the denunciation is still a matter of debate. Was he misinformed to the extent that he truly believed Poseres, who occasionally did reside in Paris during the 70s, had some influence over the actions of the PRT/ERP? Or had he simply mistaken him for Moreno or Santucho? Historian of Peronism Guillermo Martín Caviasca believed he knew exactly what he was doing. Quote, "Obviously, he knew the existence of the different internationals, and between them the contemporary Fourth International to which the ERP adhered. Surely the ideological spirit of their formation in the 30s and 40s meant they were just arms of the, quote, synarchy." End quote. Perón, then, was not only tacitly endorsing the conspiracy theory that all Marxists were in it together, but strategically shifting the blame to an external and marginal figure without the social base of Moreno and Santucho that could rush to his defense and turn him into a Guevarian icon. Considering the confused reaction in the press, it may have worked. The front page of the Prensa Confidencial ran the headline, quote, "The Fourth International, who is Poseres?" Subsequent articles were shaded by the movement's reputation among rival Trotskyists, an irrelevant sect that broke away in the 60s to push conspiracy theories and pursue contact with extraterrestrials. The jokes now spread to the rest of Argentina, turning Poseres into a pop cultural figure for the first time. The newspaper Militancia ran what was likely the first Poseres meme, mocking his newfound role as leftist boogeyman. A cartoon of a father attempting to feed his son a tablespoon of cough syrup with the warning, quote, "Take the medicine, nene, or I'll call Poseres." Voz Proletaria became widely referred to as Voz Planetaria. The Peronist youth wrote a campfire song referenced to this day, quote, "They aren't Martians nor colorful lights. They're Poseres in flying plates." End quote. The Uruguayan newspaper Así summarized the comic relief. Quote, "Logically, the news, rather than impacting vast political sectors, had the rare virtue of producing a gigantic wave of joking comments about the mention of the leader, a fool who served to break our political fever." End quote. The POT sent out a press release denying any involvement with the attack. They differed from the, quote, illegal ERP in organizational, political, and pragmatic ways, suggesting their own conspiracy theory that the Azul operation was a CIA plot to further the interests of imperialism. In an internal document, Poseres bragged that the denunciation was evidence of his own importance. Quote, "When they're concerned with us, It's because we have huge influence. It's not an accidental thing. It's very, very large, our influence in the Peronist movement." End quote. The negativity of the remarks and subsequent media caricature he likewise considered, quote, "free propaganda." Humorous as some may have found Perón's ill-informed condemnation, its hostile sentiment was a hint of the coming horrors he implied to the Peronist youth. Quote, "We, unfortunately, have to act within the law, because if at this time we did not have to act within the law, we would have finished it in a week." End quote. Soon he began to replace the JP's deputies and other government officials with figures from the right, giving more power to institutions, both legal and clandestine, determined to crush the left. Blacklisted targets began to receive anonymous warnings to leave the country. Pablo Fredes, a Poseres transport worker from Buenos Aires, was among the first trade union militants assassinated. Poseres' daughter Elvira, her husband, Sidney Fix Marques dos Santos, Santi, and their son Luigi, already refugees from Brazil, requested to join Poseres in Europe. He again ordered them to stay. Not only was their work in Argentina too important, it was not dignified for a militant to flee in fear. From the documents that followed, it appeared Elvira defied the order, traveling to France with Luigi. Marques stayed behind in bureaucratic limbo as he attempted to get a passport from the Brazilian embassy. For their insubordination, Poseres expelled them from the party. Perón died suddenly of a heart attack on the 1st of July 1974. In little over a year, he had radically reshaped the political balance of the country. His young wife, Isabel, a nightclub dancer with little political ability or ambition, was next in line. To many, she evoked a figure as important to the Peronist cult as Juan himself, his deceased wife. A charismatic anti-elitist with an impoverished rural background, Eva Perón was beloved as the working-class saint Juan could never be. After her death from uterine cancer in 1952, tens of thousands visited her body, put on display like Lenin's, and rumored to be supernaturally incorrupt. The public spectacle overshadowed the economic crisis that led to his downfall. And now Rega hoped the corpse could be reanimated to once again hide the violent contradictions of Argentine political economy. Rega also knew Isabel was no Eva, but he lived by an ethos similar to Poseres. Quote, "He who dominates the mind can dominate anything." End quote. He had the body exhumed, laid Isabel head-to-head with it, and performed, quote, "spiritual transfer exercises" over the course of several days. Believing the ritual successful, Isabel accepted her position as vice president. In reality, she was little more than Rega's puppet, quickly turning the country over to him and his robber baron allies. They quickly tanked the economy. The CGT called a 48-hour general strike, which the right took as a pretext to fully seize power from Isabel in a military coup. Over the next 5 years, Argentina became the most brutal theater of, quote, Operation Condor, an alliance of anti-communist military dictatorships in Chile, Uruguay, Brazil, and Paraguay. Their, quote, national reorganization process banned Marxist literature and imprisoned and tortured dissidents, ultimately murdering an estimated 30,000. Among them was Poseres' son-in-law. On the 15th of February 1976, just days before the AAA coup, Santi was kidnapped from his home on Avenida Scalabrini Ortiz by 10 agents in civilian clothes. After weeks with no word, his parents flew from Brazil to Buenos Aires to search for him. Poseres also pledged his support, but after a year of searching, he was finally forced to admit Santi was gone. Quote, "If they killed him, it's because he refused to talk," Poseres imagined. Because he gave an address that wasn't his, so they killed him to make him talk. That's to say that his death was dignified. End quote. Santi was another martyr for the movement, joining the pantheon of Paulo Roberto Pinto, Francisco Amado Granados, David Aguilar Mora, Eunice Campiran, Olavo Hansen, Rui Oswaldo, Nestor Ruben Antoniazas Perez, Jose Luis Jimenez Calderon, and Horacio Luis Blinder, memorialized each fall with the songs of Gardel, sung by the socialist leader determined to end history's cruel cycles forever. Beginning of song. I am afraid of the encounter, with the past that returns, to confront my life. I am afraid of the nights that, filled with memories, shackle my dreams. But the traveler that flees sooner or later stops his walking. And although forgetfulness, which destroys all, has killed my old dream, I keep concealed a humble hope that is my heart's whole fortune. End of song and end of section.